Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our festival, Bangkok Age Festival. This is the first Ideas Festival that happened in Thailand. I'm so honored to have you all here. Today, we will talk about the books and the authors. When we have so many authors come and join us. And the first book that we will talk, it will be about the best-selling book called Crazy Rich Asians. We are honored to have bestseller author Kevin Kwan with us today. He will be the conversation with Srinthorn Chandraprasert, former editor of Hello magazine and a successful businesswoman and media personality. Before we start, I would like to ask you to turn off the mobile phone and put it on the silence mode. And also the press who is at the behind, please not use the flash or make the noise and make the sound to respect the talk. Please welcome Kun Kevin Kwan and Kun Srinthorn Chandraprasert.
Hello everyone. We're delighted to be here to kick off the first session of Bangkok Edge. And I'm so excited to be here with you, Kevin. As you all know, and as Kandim mentioned, he is the most talked about author today. And I am so glad that he's Asian. Yay! Yay for all of us. And his first book, Crazy Rich Asian, was a runaway bestseller, international. And it's been translated to 12 languages. And of course, they're making a Hollywood film out of it by none other than the producers of The Hunger Games. So when is that coming out?
Hopefully next year.
Thank you for being here with us, Kevin.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for coming today so early. So lovely to be here in Thailand and to be amongst all of you.
Thank you. Well, since we are talking about Crazy Rich Asians, do you want to tell us a little bit about the book? What inspired you to write it?
It's always difficult to ask an author to describe their own book because I can think of a million things to say. It's a comedy, it's a romance. The heart of it is it's a story of two people. Nicholas Young is the heir to one of the largest fortunes in Singapore. And he brings his American-born Chinese girlfriend, who's never been to Asia, to Singapore to meet his relatives and attend a friend's wedding. And he doesn't expect, none of them expect, all the different machinations and scheming and things that would happen the minute they arrive at the island. So that is the sort of centerpiece of a story that's really about a family, about a big, crazy, rich Asian family. How's that?
About the creme of society, right? Of Singaporean society. And for me, it's a little bit Downton Abbey meets Gossip Girls, and I hope you've all seen it. You can imagine what it's like.
Thank you. What a comparison.
Is that right? Yes. And what inspired you to write this story? I mean, it's really, and it's almost like an insider story about the really wealthy and the rarefied circle of the very rich of Asia. What inspired you to write this story?
Two things really. First of all, I was really writing the book as a hobby for myself because I would go to Asia and visit family and visit relatives and friends, and I would come back. And every time I came back, I would tell my friends in New York, I live in New York, I would tell them stories of what happened, what I did, and I didn't realize how crazy my stories were, to most of my friends living in New York. And I was told over and over again for many years, you have to write this, you have to put this down on paper.
So when you say stories, you're talking about real stories that you're telling your friends.
Real stories,
right? Yes.
like going to Hong Kong and I would be met at the airport by 4 maids. 4 maids would come and meet me, wanting to carry my luggage, and I would be so embarrassed going, I can take my own luggage, things like that. So to me, so to most Americans, these are bizarre stories, basically, And I wanted to write something that was sort of inspired by my childhood in Singapore. So I matched those two up, childhood stories with my experience of Asia when I go back to visit. And this is what happened.
What is your childhood story?
I had a very idyllic, boring childhood. So I felt as a child,
So idyllic that it was boring.
Exactly. But it was only after I moved to the United States when I was 11 years old that I realized that I grew up in a certain degree of privilege and that not everyone grew up in that manner, and so that began my process of sort of being able to see this interesting little world that I had grown up in on a very interesting island called Singapore.
Can you clarify more on that? I mean, there's so many levels of privileges, right? I understand your great-grandfather founded the oldest bank in Singapore.
He was one of the founders.
He was one of the founders.
So, I grew up in a sort of, just very old, established family, and it was, very, very easy and genteel and rarefied, and I felt that that part of Asia was not really being talked about or written about in books. In books and in the media, you only really saw a lot of stories about sort of the vulgarity of the wealth and how, the crazy spending that some of these mainland Chinese do and things like that, and you hear the sensational stories. And I wanted to tell a different story. I wanted to show sort of the civilization that existed, sort of this rarefied civilization that I'd always grown up with. That was a very different crowd than what you hear and see in the media these days.
And I remember reading that you felt you were poor because your friends were living in these glass towers with carpeted floors and shiny furniture. Well, you had to sleep in an antique bed.
Yeah, I mean, as a child, you have very little awareness of your surroundings, and I remember, growing up in a house, which is quite rare in Singapore in the first place, because most people live in apartments, and going to visit my friends, and they'd be in high-rise towers, and they'd wall-to-wall carpeting, and sliding glass doors, and that, to me, as a child, was, oh wow, look at this is glamour, this is living, I have to live in a house with these weird hardwood floors and all this old furniture, and I have to always be mindful of not breaking china and things like that. And, I had no clue at that point. It was only after I left, looking back, that I could see, how different my upbringing was than many Singaporeans. So I was very fortunate in that regard.
Was Tarsal Park based on your house? I don't know if you've read Crazy Rich Asians, but Tarsal Park is this magnificent palace, and it's behind the botanical garden, and nobody knows that it's there, and it's hidden. And when you drive into it, there's a rusty door in front that has Tarsal Park, and you drive. It takes miles for you to get into, before you actually get to the palace of a house. And is that based in your house? And is it even real, that kind of property in Singapore? I mean, I know about Singapore, but I haven't seen that kind of estate.
Well, first of all, Tarsal Park does exist. The house exists, and it still exists in Singapore. No one lives there. It's not an abandoned house, but it's a 55-acre property in the middle of Singapore, right in the heart of town. And it's owned by the Sultan of Johor in Malaysia. And he
mentioned the Sultan in the book.
Exactly, and it's been in his family for generations, and he has no interest in doing anything with it, which is, I think, wonderful. It's become almost sort of a wildlife preserve. So that was the set piece that sort of inspired me to start writing about this, because there were, up till the 60s and 70s, there were many great estates in Singapore, and unfortunately, most of them no longer exist. It's all been developed. Singapore is very much like New York now in terms of being this giant metropolis. There are a few hidden estates still, but there are very few and far between. So, in a way, there are elements of that house that are inspired by my upbringing and by my family home. But no, I did not grow up in a palace in 55 acres.
I'm so disappointed to hear that.
But it was a very nice, lovely home anyway. But nowhere as big.
And and the story is based around this imperious matriarch, Shang Shu-yi, right?
Good pronunciation.
Is that right? Yes. And she controls everyone because of her wealth, is that correct?
Her wealth and her lineage.
Is that correct, or because of who she is, or because she's descended from the physicians of the Tang dynasty? Or what? What is it? Because she is old money. Right? How would you describe her, in relevancy to old money?
It's a combination of all these factors, of having come from a background of extreme wealth, but also the influence and power that her family has had in Singapore for generations. And she's the 90-year-old matriarch of this family. So she really rules the family with an iron fist. There's very few sort of empresses of Singapore around anymore.
So essentially she rules Singapore because her children are the center of power of Singapore, correct?
In a very covert way. You know what I mean? They're not in very public
So-
centers of power, but they're sort of behind the scenes pulling the strings. And I think you find that, not just in Singapore, but many Asian countries. You know, the true power really remains hidden. They don't want to show themselves. They don't want to appear on any of the rich lists and things like that. They prefer to be really in the background, but really in very subtle positions of influence. And I wanted to show that layered complexity of these families and all the machinations that happen, you know, in the country, but also within the family.
And I love it because they're so powerful, so rich, but so discreet that no one knows them. No one has heard of them in the whole Singapore. And Pike Lin, you know, Rachel's Heron's best friend, comes from one of the wealthiest Singaporean families, the most successful real estate developer family. And the whole family has never heard of this family, this Shang Su Yi's family, and I think that's incredible how you created. Do you think there are still families like this in Asia?
Absolutely.
You know it for sure.
I know it for sure, yeah. And you probably know it for sure too. I mean, I think in Thailand they probably exist, wouldn't you say?
They do, yes, we don't talk about it.
Exactly, you know, in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, I find, you know.
I agree with you that I hear about it so often, but do you think that it's...
Mistresses, you know, social climbers, and things like that. But also the great philanthropists.
Absolutely.
You know, they're all there. And so every story in the book, I think, has a root in reality and in a real family story.
I find it interesting that Nicholas Young, the hero of the story, and the heir, you know, to the kingdom, and his equally wealthy cousin, you know, Astrid, decide to look for partners outside their circle. You know, they go for the normal people and not the right partners. Is there a reason why you did that?
I think for them, you know, growing up in this atmosphere, it was very claustrophobic.
They're trying to run away from it.
Exactly, and I think both in their different ways, Nicholas and Astrid, you know, have rebelled quietly. And they're in a position where they don't have to marry for dynastic reasons. They can marry whoever they want. They think, of course. The family always feels differently. So therein lies all the issues and complexities of, you know, what you want versus what your parents want, what your grandparents want. I think that's a conflict that is, you know, very present in modern day Southeast Asian society.
Yes.
Absolutely.
For this small, tight circle.
Yeah.
And is Nicholas based on anyone you know?
Nicholas is a combination of quite a few people I know.
Talk a little bit about them? This makes it all the more interesting.
Well, you know, I have had friends who have, I have a lot of friends who have grown up in different parts of Southeast Asia, whether it's Hong Kong or Singapore or mainland China, you know, that either go to the States or they go to Britain, they fall in love, they meet lovely people, and when they bring them home to meet the family, there's always problems, you know.
Yes.
I recently have a friend that, you know, he was forced to break up with his fiancée because his parents really felt that she was not from the proper family and the proper background. So they've had to break up after 5 years of relationship.
Stand the pressure.
He could not stand the pressure, and the fact that this still exists in this day and age is quite remarkable, I find. Coming from a more Western point of view, where I've been raised in for the past, 30 years.
30 years. And I know, because this sounds a lot like Eleanor Young, right, Nicholas's mother, because she herself comes from a very good family, but even she feels that she hasn't been accepted by this great imperialist family. She still feels that she's an outsider.
50 years later, she's still...
50 years later, yes.
In the book, in her character, 30 years later, she's still not accepted by her family.
But she's become the most snobbish of them all. She's the one who doesn't want Nicholas to marry Rachel. And this is who she is. Allow me to just read this. Within 30 seconds of learning their name and where they lived, Eleanor could calculate precisely where they stood in her constellation based on who their family was, who else they were related to, what their approximate net worth might be, how the fortune was derived, and what family scandals might have occurred within the past 50 years. I mean, how can you ever get past that? My goodness! Did anyone you know, your family have to go through that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I find myself in these social situations as well, where I will meet people, and you know, this is not even in Asia, this is outside of Asia. I'll be in New York and I'll meet a certain Asian someone, and within 5 minutes they will try to figure out who I am, who I'm related to, you know, all these things. And it's, to me, it's so amusing. You know, snobbery to me is very amusing, and the root of why people are snobs endlessly fascinates me, I would have to say.
And when you go back home, do you feel that you're different?
Oh, very much so.
And that's because of your American upbringing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm
American grounded you.
It changed me. It changed me, and I'm you know, I'm very much an outsider to Asia, and really just an observer of what I see. And so my books really are a filter of that, you know, from a more Western perspective of Asia.
Because you moved to Houston when you were 11 or 12.
I was 11 years old.
Right. So how was that? I mean, what was that like? Did you move to, you know, a gated community?
I was really in sort of American suburbia. I think it was really kind of the typical suburban background. And at first it was very much of a shock because I felt that Singapore, even this was in the mid-80s, was so much more cosmopolitan. And it was a big city compared to Houston, Texas. So it was a bit of a culture shock in the beginning. You know, the first year I really had a tough time. But I see in hindsight, you know, sort of the plan my father had for his children, and he, you know, really sort of wanted us to have a different experience of life that wasn't just about Asia.
Does that mean that he didn't enjoy his experience when he was living in Singapore? He didn't enjoy that circle and that wealth that he grew up in?
I actually think he grew up partly in Australia. He was sent away to boarding school for about, 9 years. So I think part of him was also very westernized. And I think he enjoyed that lifestyle, and he wanted the freedom and the independence that he had enjoyed in Australia.
He wanted to give it to his children.
Exactly.
Do you have siblings?
I do.
Okay.
I have 2 brothers.
And what are they doing?
They're not writers.
They're not, okay, good. As long as they're not writers.
Yeah. They've got into much more established, respectable careers.
Well, so you moved to Houston because of your parents. They wanted to be independent, and you got that, obviously.
Yeah, I would say so.
So when you go back home to Singapore, do you fit in?
I haven't been back in a very long time to Singapore, but when I go to...
Your family's still there, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but whenever I travel to Asia, I do feel very much like I'm a visitor, and sort of a cultural anthropologist. So I sort of fit in and I don't fit in at the same time. Because I understand elements of the culture, but I'm still, very much outside of it.
No, it's interesting because I have friends who've moved to the States, to Australia, to wherever, from Thailand at the age of 11, and they don't even remember anything. They become so westernized, that they don't even remember all these details that you've remembered. I think it's astonishing how much you've actually retained. And so that must come from you going back often and being part of that circle still.
No, not really. I think for me it's more that because I left at the age I left at 11, I was old enough to also appreciate aspects of the culture. And it all crystallized for me in a very interesting way. Like so many of my childhood memories are so vivid, and so many of them have made it into the book as a result. And I think if I had actually gone back more often, I would lose those memories. For example, I have childhood friends from Singapore that I meet now who have no recollection of me. But I can remember everything about them, everything that happened to us when we were 7 years old. So memory is a very interesting thing. And I think writing also brings out the memory in a very interesting way, and it sort of transforms the experience that one has gone through as a child.
Your memories have sort of been frozen at that age, and you remember every single detail.
Exactly.
And now you're making it more relevant to the times now. That's wonderful.
Exactly.
And I love how you made this. I think this book is so funny. You told me that you're actually a serious person. But and then I sort of analyzed it. Do you think it's funny just because you wrote it in sort of Singlish? Well, not Singlish, but it's the way Singaporeans speak, right? You have like all these Hokkien words and these Malay words, and I keep saying alamak now. And like, alamak, stop doing that. And I love how you did it. It's so authentic.
The humor of language,
Yes.
I think, is very interesting to me. And Singlish, I think, is unlike really any other language in the world. It's such a patois combination of English and Malay and Chinese, and and so for me, it's very amusing, and it's brought a lot of amusement to readers around the world to discover all the different slang terms, in Singlish.
Well, looking back in hindsight, what was your most extravagant moment, your memories of extravagance?
From my childhood or
From your
from
childhood.
more recent times?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I would say that the most remarkable moment I have was going into a friend's house and seeing a pond in the middle of their living room. And in the pond were baby sharks. That, I think, it was the most sort of James Bond moment I've had.
And that appears in Crazy...
It does. I make a reference to
Yes.
it. It's not the same family, not the same
not the same,
context,
right.
but the
China
memory of
rich
that.
girlfriends, right?
Yeah, the
Call
memory
it
of
Bing's
that.
house. Have any of you read China Rich? You have, my goodness, you're a fan, Mr. Wow, you're a fan
Thank
right
you.
here. Are you? Yes. Excuse me? Are you gonna get the book?
So we won't ruin too much for you.
No, we shouldn't. Which character do you find yourself, linked to most, connected to most?
That's an interesting question. I think in many ways, every single character is like a child of mine. So there's a bit of my DNA in every character that I write about, in book one and in book two. But if I really had to choose one that I would relate to most, it would be a very minor character in the book. His name is Alistair Cheng. So he's the younger brother of the very snobby Eddie Cheng.
Yes.
He's the artist brother. He's in film. He's a film producer.
And he had a soft porn girlfriend, I remember. Kitty Pong. So that's who you are, I see.
I didn't say that.
Now we know, see? Sorry, I interrupted you. You're saying you feel most connected to him. Because?
In a way, because it's rather funny because and it's a recurring joke in my books that he actually has a serious career as a film producer, but no one in the family takes it seriously, and they always go, "Oh, he's doing something in film," or "He's a film assistant," or this and that. No one really takes the fact he's a career seriously because they can't relate to it. It's not a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or a banker. So.
And do your family take your career seriously as a writer and a soon-to-be producer, right? Film producer.
They have more in recent years than they have in the past.
Really? What were they like in the past? Were they?
I think they were very dubious.
Whether you would make it or not.
Exactly. I think a lot of it comes
Worried.
from concern.
Like Asian
Yes.
parents
Yeah.
are very concerned about their
Yes. My mother is still very
Secure.
concerned about me.
She still is.
Yes.
International bestseller list, Hollywood movie coming out. My goodness.
I gave a talk at Google about 2 months ago, and I thought it'd be nice to bring my mother, just because she doesn't really travel much, but I thought it'd be nice to give her a sense of what I do, what my day job is. And so I gave a talk at the Google campus in front of a lot of the Google employees, and afterwards she went around asking everyone whether they could get me a job at Google. She was impressed by the free lunch. Everyone gets a free lunch at Google. There's free gyms. She was like, "Kevin, you need to get a job here."
What would make her feel secure? For you?
Dental school, maybe?
Oh! She's the quintessential Asian mom.
Can't escape it. So I do write from a place of experience.
So Houston didn't change her a bit?
A little bit.
What was she like before? She's changed a bit now.
I think in Singapore she actually had a much more privileged life. She was a very typical Singapore tai. Although she did work, she was a piano teacher. But in the US, she really, living in the US imbues you with more of an independence, if you know what I mean. And so she learned to run her own household. She learned how to cook and has become a very accomplished cook.
Housewife.
And a teacher.
And a teacher.
She still teaches. She's 76 years old and she's got 35 students. So she's become much more independent in the States than I think she would have been had she remained in Singapore.
And your parents never regretted moving they have no regrets moving to the States, right?
Not at all. Yeah, not at all.
Oh, that's great. And your first book and second book, and third book, we'll talk about fabulous wealth. I see so much in your books about people, and no matter how rich one is, there's always this insecurity. Talk about Eleanor Young, Nicholas's mother. She still feels insecure. She still feels like a stranger 50 years, after marriage. And there's this other woman, Araminta Lee. Do you remember Araminta Lee, this fashion model and daughter of a billionaire? She's getting married to one of the richest men in the world. Khalid Koo, right? Am I getting all these names right?
Very good.
Thank you. And this Astrid, who's Nicholas's fashionable fashion icon cousin, comes to her wedding and she notices that Astrid is wearing a Jean-Paul Gaultier dress for the second time, and she's furious. She thinks she's in this, and she is,
Bride, mind you.
Yeah, she is the bride, and this is a 40 million wedding that her mother is arranging for her, and all she can do is concentrate and focus on Astrid wearing this dress for the second time. She's thinking, bitch, I've invested and put so much effort to this wedding. Why can't she? This is insecurity, and so rich, and all she can notice, is this one person who she thinks is better than her, and so many more, that in the book. What do you think about the insecurity of the wealthy?
Well, I think I try to reveal truths about people and about the nature of all of us. We're all infallible, in many ways, and money doesn't buy you happiness. Money doesn't buy you security. In fact, some of the most wealthy people I know tend to be the most insecure people, which is very interesting because I think it's the ambition and the insecurity that has driven them to a certain degree of success, if you know what I mean. But at the end of the day, they haven't healed that inner child, whatever that was, that sort of, was the insecure, shy child to begin with. And so you see that come out, and money doesn't, money can buy you some cover and some protection, but it can also bring out the beast in you, and it can also cause a lot of problems in your life.
It can corrupt.
It can corrupt.
Like with Bernard Tai and Eddie, right?
Exactly. Or you don't necessarily are able to find true friends or true love.
Exactly.
Because people are too blinded by your money, which is the case of Astrid Liem, one of my other heroines.
Right, yes.
Where she's, all she wants.
Has everything.
She has everything.
So lonely.
But she's so
That's probably why you called her Astrid, the Snow Queen. Astrid is such a Scandinavian Nordic name. Cold, beautiful, but untouchable.
You got it. Thank you.
Is that right?
Absolutely.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Every name has a meaning in the books. Nothing is accidental. So, thank you for noticing.
Thank you, and you're welcome. And talking about happiness, I just read that Harvard just did a 75-year study on happiness, and only one thing makes human beings happy: not wealth, not the successful career in the end. It's quality relationships. So if you have that in your life, keep it, because that will keep you young and happy forever. Okay. So quality of life. Do these people have quality of life? Not in that wealthy sense, but do they have meaningful relationships? I don't see a single couple that's happy here. And I am rooting for Nicholas and Rachel, because I know that Astrid will not be happy with Michael.
It's more interesting to write about heartbreak, wouldn't you say, than to write about happy families all day long,
But could
I
you
think.
squeeze one couple in,
Well, there is book
You
3.
give me-
There's book 3, and we'll see what happens in book 3.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah. But thank you for noticing that, despite the wealth, despite the trappings, these are people with immense problems and complications in their lives, which is really kind of part of the moral of the story, I wonder.
What is it? The moral of the story. In your own words. In your own words.
Life is complicated, and it's not all about money.
Simple but true, right? So the first book was based in Singapore. The second one based in Shanghai, and that is like outrageous. And the third one, well, where would that be based?
Well, you'll have to see, but I think you might
Hint,
be
hint, hint.
in sort of the right geographic part of the world.
Well, that I'm sure of.
Yet again, I really structured, when I first began writing all these books, I had a trilogy in mind, and I wanted to really show different facets of Asia, not just Singapore. I really meant for the book to jump to Hong Kong, to China, to Thailand, Philippines, and really show different facets of life in all these different parts of Asia that I'm consistently fascinated with. So you'll see a lot more traveling in the next book, and more new territory covered.
That's traveling on the private jet, of course. But
Of course.
as mentioned before, his books have been translated to 12 languages, but why not in Chinese?
It's a very interesting question, because every Chinese publisher has read it and claimed to have loved the book, but they don't feel they can make it past the Chinese censors.
Because you have the government, you have something a little bit on the government, a little bit on
Well, you have fewer characters,
extravagance.
especially the second book, you have characters who are related to political families. But that's the truth, that's the reality of what's happening in China. A lot of the most powerful families are related to people in the position of influence in the political circles. And so I try to tell the truth as much as possible in my books, from a very sort of socio-anthropological point. But I'm not trying to beat anyone over the head with it. I'm just saying it like I see it. And I think China now is really they're very aware of the wealth gap, of the income disparity between the super rich in China and really everyone else is still sort of living, middle class to below poverty level. And with social media, they've become much more conscious of it. The son of the richest man in China, Wang Xikong, he's been posting all these very sort of obnoxious pictures on Instagram. So, I think it was last year when he posted a picture of his dog wearing two $10,000 watches on each leg. And, that sort of went viral. And there was a huge public backlash, So I think the Chinese government, being very sensitive to that, they sent 50 of the children of the wealthiest families to sort of boot camp, where they had to learn to become more private and learn sort of new values of how to not be so showy.
Can you tell me more about this boot camp? So how long was it?
I think it was a week long.
Okay.
I'm still trying to get in to find out exactly what
How
happened,
interesting.
because it'd be so interesting to find out what was said in that. But we do know it happened.
Put it in the third book. But all that, so hence the austerity measures that China has placed, right? Because I remember, reading in Crazy Rich Girlfriend when Carlton Bao's mother, thanked Eleanor Young for taking care of him. So she got a gift of an Hermes Birkin, but in white Himalayan crocodile, and that's the most expensive Hermes. And she's like, "Oh, I can't take this. This is too extravagant." And the young boy, takes her hand and leads her, to the bedroom, and opens the door, and there are everywhere,
Hundreds,
thousands, there's no space left. It's filled with Hermes bags, and he says, "These are all gifts for my mother to give to all the people who took care of me." That is.
It's funny you mention that, because since the second book has come out, so many of the wealthy Chinese have photographed their Hermes closets and sent me pictures of it, proving to me that, this is what I do too, so it's kind of funny.
They better be careful of the bling, what's it called? The bling ring?
Bling ring!
Yes, the bling ring. Nish, you're here, Nish, right?
I knew it.
These people, actually follow Instagrams, and they will track the owners down and then steal all these Hermes bags in expensive fashion from the owners. My goodness. So I guess they don't have that in China yet. No one's
It's a
afraid
little
yet.
harder, because I think, these people are well protected.
Oh, that's right. Guards.
Exactly, so there you have it.
So, and you're free to ask questions if you'd like. If I'm not hitting what I'm supposed to, please help me. Anyone with questions to ask, please?
This is maybe as much a compliment as a question. In the first chapter of Crazy Rich Asians, which is absolutely my favorite opening chapter of any book I've read in a long time, the family checks into the California Hotel in London, and that chapter leaves me outraged or sad about the racism that's involved in that. But at the same time, kind of satisfied because they get it back at the manager of the hotel. Is that an inspiration? Did something like that actually happen in some classy hotel in London?
It absolutely did, and that story is completely 100% inspired by a real event. It's no accident that 4 of the top hotels in London are now owned by Singaporean families.
Those are the reasons behind it.
Well, can't say, but it was very much inspired by a true story.
You can raise your hand and then I can get the microphone to you, maybe on the other side. Yes. แถวข้างหลังตรงกลางค่ะ I try to, even out on both sides, left and right.
I'm glad it's democratic. Kevin, I was just really surprised to hear that about the Chinese language, but you seem to take it that it's either a question of for a Chinese language version being mainland China, but wouldn't there be, are you saying there's no Chinese translation, whether Singaporean, Hong Kong, whatever?
Nope.
Amazing. So
Yeah.
when you get all
It's sold in China in English,
Yeah.
and it does very well in China in English. And actually, I met a professor at Beijing Normal University who is teaching the book to her students, and they're loving it. So it's interesting that it's made its way, within a certain cognoscenti, in China, but it's not available in the mass market.
Right, so you're saying the publishers, like Chinese publishers, read it and felt it was too sensitive, but then there's a load of publishers out there who have nothing to do with mainland China who publish in Chinese. So I don't see why some publisher wouldn't see any opportunity there, because the Chinese expat community, as we know, is vast.
Well, if you know someone that my agent can talk to, I'd be...
Well, there's a publisher in the corner over there. So.
Okay,
He's
next
just on the
And that's
top
Gwen,
row.
by the way, so you can follow up on her.
Alright, next question to the far back, please. Gentleman in the black t-shirt.
Thanks. Yeah, two very short questions. First, have you? Okay, that's not the first one. Sorry.
Hi!
Have you found that your circle of friends has got smaller because they're paranoid that you're going to use them as creative material for your books?
Actually, not at all. I think, my friends in New York are they're all a bit mystified because I never told anyone I was writing this book. And, in my other life in New York, I was a design consultant for many years. So my friends tend to be more on the visual side of things. And so the fact that I wrote a book is still kind of a shock to them all. And I think most of them haven't even read it, so I haven't lost any friends yet. Go for it.
Sorry, and also, how long did it take you to get a deal? It sounds like a sort of surefire shot with the actual kind of content of the books, but did you have to shop around quite a while to get a publishing deal?
I was amazingly lucky, and it's really kind of a gift of what happened, because I showed my book to a good friend who is he's a very accomplished writer in his own right, Michael Korda. He's written many books, novels, and nonfiction, and he was also the editor-in-chief of Simon & Schuster for 50 years. And it helps to have friends with that influential. And he passed it along to his agent, and she loved my book. And so it was easy for me to find a really good agent to represent the book from the very beginning. And they showed publishers. I think it went out to 18 publishers, and within a week, there was a lot of interest. Very, very lucky.
And it hit the bestsellers less than a week after it got to the shelves. And were you surprised? Did you ever think you would be like
I'm still
international
surprised.
bestseller?
I'm still surprised. I'm surprised I'm sitting right here right now. I'm even when I meet someone who's actually read the book, it still surprises me. So, it's all cream and gravy at this point. So thank you for reading the book.
คนมาข้างหน้าค่ะทางคุณชิมัน and you'll be you next.
I also have two short questions. One is, it seems to me that you really got the male characters right and the female characters right.
I'm so glad you said that. I thought you were going to accuse me of not getting the women right.
No, and so I wanted to ask how you went about getting the women right, because you're not a woman. And so that's the first question.
I have to say that women have been such a strong, have played such a strong role in my life. Beginning with my grandmother, to my aunt, who's in the audience today, to my own mother. So I've always had a sort of simpatico, an understanding for strong female voices and characters. And also, it was easy for me because so many of the characters are inspired by real people. And I can see the complications of their lives and their problems, and that's what helped to inspire characters like Astrid, like Rachel. So for me, it's more about observation than anything else.
The second one pertains to the film. So they're making a film of the first book, and you're involved in that in some way.
I am. I'm an executive producer, and I've sort of been intrinsically involved throughout the entire process.
So it seems to me that almost every time a book that I really like gets made into a movie, the movie's terrible. And I don't even sometimes want to see the movie because I enjoy the book so much. As an executive producer, will you have any influence on them maybe getting it right, or are they going to take it somewhere?
Well, Brad Pitt is going to play Nicholas Young, and
His wish list. I hope that comes true.
I chose the team to work with because I felt they promised me they would be as faithful as they possibly could to the original source material. This being said, a 400-page novel is going to be very different from an hour and 45-minute long movie. So concessions have to be made, plots might have to be changed slightly. You're reaching a different audience, a different context. So I'm allowing for that, as long as it keeps the spirit of the book and says the right things that I want to say. So we'll see, but so far I've been nothing but pleased with all the choices we've all been making as a group. And Nina Jacobson, my producer, has an amazing track record of keeping authors happy. That's all she's done, so I'm trusting that same will be true, and I hope you enjoy the movie.
Do you know who's been chosen as the main characters?
We haven't gone into casting yet, so that's really what we're going to be doing in the next few months, hopefully.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, the next question. I would like to ask you to put the microphone closer to your mouth, and then we can all hear you clearly. Thank you.
What was interesting in your discussion, you mentioned about people of great wealth, and it appeared that Asian countries, they are not showing the wealth and they want to keep it kind of quiet. Where in North America, it appears, at least to me, not on the list, but the list of the wealthiest people is something individuals like to see themselves on, as well as what position they're in. My question then would be, is this a vast cultural difference between, say, North America and Asia?
Well, I think there are two sides of the story, because I think you're finding now in mainland China, there is a new class of the very wealthy who are exuberantly proud of their wealth. And they've created all these rich lists, and things like that, and they're all fighting and vying to be on it, in the same way that Americans, a lot of them are proud to be on the Forbes 400. But I find that with a lot of the older Chinese families that have been wealthy for generations, they have found it in their best interests, over the centuries, to keep it as discreet and private as possible.
I think it's also interesting in the book how you distinguished each country by its wealthy. Can you describe more about that? The Hong Kong wealthy, they're different from the Singaporean wealthy, and the Thais are more aristocratic.
Well, I'm really devolving into stereotype here, of course. So you can
it's fun. I like it. Just share.
I think there's always been. What's fun to me is that every country has its own snobberies, and every country of Asia feels like it's the most superior of them all.
Absolutely.
So Singaporeans, of course, feel that they're the most civilized, they're the Switzerland of Asia, this and that. The Hong Kongese feel that Singaporeans are so boring and have no dress sense. And the Thais, I think, with your ancient history and culture, you feel that look at all these people. They're just sort of heathens. That's the impression I got. And the Filipinos just want to have fun. Should I go on?
Yes, please. We can go on for the last question. How about the last question? Anybody would like to ask a question? or he can go on. Okay.
He has a question. He's ready.
Yeah, I guess. Well, I skipped over, but I guess my question was, continuation of the first question that was asked. That was kind of based on a real event. So how much of the books, or I guess how many of the incidents are based on real events, like small roman thefts, if you will, of things that really happened, and if you could point to another crazy incident that you incorporate into the book that just for me, I read it and I'm like, really, is that really happening?
I would say that 90% of everything in the book is something that I've either seen with my two eyes or experienced.
So it's not
And in many cases, I had to tone things down. My editor insisted that I do that for the sake of believability. So, it's so true. Truth is stranger than fiction.
Give us one quick example of one thing you had to tone down. We're dying to hear this.
Nick had too many girlfriends. This was interesting. Too many girlfriends in his past, because in the Crazy Rich Asians, we meet two of his ex-girlfriends.
Yes.
They come out of the woodwork to sort of bother Rachel.
He had a threesome with them, I remember right. Okay.
And in the original draft of my book, there were actually 4 girls that came out of the woodwork, and my publisher explained, well, my editor, who was a lovely, very smart, accomplished editor, she said, you have to kill at least 2 of the girlfriends. You cannot have more than 2 ex-girlfriends, or female readers will never forgive him. So that was interesting.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I really want to continue this conversation with you, but I think we're out of time.
But if
Thank you so much for all your questions. It's been so much fun to be here and to answer them. So I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
And I look forward to reading your 3rd book. And also,
I look forward to writing it.
yes, and I didn't mention this, but he has his own film and production company. So it's not just his film, it's not just Crazy Rich Asian that will be coming out. He has more in the pipeline.
A TV show! Yay!
Yay! Okay, thank you so much, Kevin.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you. And also, you can have a look at the books outside in both English and also Thai. If somebody wants to read in Thai too, this is like the first day that they launched the book in Thai. And the name is pretty pretty. It's called Liem Botun. It means the flower, the peony flower, or it's like the Chinese flower with the angle. It's just not as soft. Has its own age. So you're welcome to take a look at that. And also Kevin will be outside and do book signing for 30 minutes. And also if you would like your friends or anybody to go back and meet him, he will be signing the book at the hardcover, which is on the 4th floor at the Central Embassy on the 18th of February around 5 to 6 p.m. So if you
Next
would like to
Thursday,
spread the
book
word,
signing.
if you would like to spread the word, please welcome. And also we will meet again in the next 30 minutes. We will have 30 minutes break and you can have another conversation with him. And also